My name is Harris Diamant.
And what was your father's name?
Sussman Diamant.
What was the name of your first pet?
Miss Levy. I very much wanted to be an artist without deciding to be an artist from really early on. I had longings to make things. In college, I was a 16-year-old who had no real wherewithal to study, and one was required to declare a major. And for some reason that's totally mysterious to me, I declared that I was a pre-veterinary medicine. The reality is it's totally inappropriate. I fell in with a crowd of people, as most kids do. They were all art majors and lit majors, English majors. And we all had membership cards to the Museum of Modern Art. Looking at the art was actually incidental to sipping coffee and hanging out in the cafeteria. Art just became integrated into my life. I took courses in everything that was available. I was an undergraduate for 6 years, mostly because I was having a really good time. In 1962, 1963, the New York flea market opened up on 26th Street and 6th Avenue, and I started participating in that market, and ultimately opened up a shop on 71st Street between Columbus Avenue and Central Park West. My introduction to that was not folk art at all. That came later. My introduction was really Art Nouveau and weird lamps, frogs holding jeweled shades over their heads, Art Nouveau jewelry, silver boxes. They were better than a three-piece tweed suit. And, I was swept away. It was a real eye-opener to me. You have to learn to, in an almost magical way, see something that was distant. So you sort of have to pick up the object's aura in order to make this a worthwhile experience. So, I mean, this is training and how to make judgments and this is training for a critical sense. What it involves is evaluating an object, its age, its form, its surface, its color, it's just on and on. And you have to do this in a flash, because almost all the time there's someone standing behind you. And often, particularly at flea markets, which was really a primary source, that someone was someone who was somewhere between pushy and aggressive and sees it and wants to score it. And, hey, Diamond, make up your mind. You're going to buy it? So you have to make up your mind. So it's a real competitive situation. My grandparents came here in the 1890s, immigrants from Poland and Romania, and settled on the Lower East Side of New York. My parents were both born here on the Lower East Side, and their first language, both of them, was Yiddish. I'm a Bronx boy, all the way, a product of New York City. I was born at the end of 1937, so I went through World War II in the West Bronx. I have vague recollections of that. Block parties, fundraisers, big American flags across the street. I was an American boy dealing in America. American folk art, it struck a chord, it hit a place in my spirit. And it was just easy to recognize. The stuff was out there. The countryside and flea markets and were just full of wonderful things. Picking was really easy. I dealt with things that I was drawn to. Scientific instruments, microscopes, telescopes. I had a real specialty in model steam, that is, live steam operating miniature steam engines. I was drawn to models. There's stuff that falls into folk art that were made by artisans. They were professionally trained. They didn't go to art school, it didn't exist that way, but they worked through an apprenticeship and became extremely competent at the techniques of doing whatever it was that they were doing. Carving cigars or Indians, making signs, or figureheads for ships. In my early 40s, it sort of appeared to me that this was my last chance to submerge myself in a very vigorous, almost, I guess, physical way. I learned how to silver solder and braze, and by going to low-level high school techs and occasionally asking the guy behind the counter in the hardware store. That was my approach to doing it. I tried very hard to follow the path that it leads me rather than wresting control. I made a series of crosses out of lead because I like the form. The cross is really, really, really beautiful. I immediately had a powerful subject. I decided that I was going to make heads because they capture the most important part of a human being. There's enough forms in there to be a universe. There's something that draws me to those heads that are segmented, and the segments are labeled with personality traits. That was cutting-edge science in the early 19th century. And I understand how they're related to anatomical mannequins, lithographs, man or woman, and they're done in layers. I don't know why I'm drawn to it. I understand that I am. The Oddfellows they still exist, but they are a secret organization that flourished here in the 19th century. A lot of their graphics had to do with ancient Egypt. They were basically hieroglyphs. One of their primary symbols was the all-seeing eye. What's the eye of God? And it's represented by a single eye. You have to look at it to see that they're there, but it's surrounded by rays. And it's omniscience. It's something you can't hide from. It looks like something that would have been entombed with a pharaoh. All of my sculptures use that Oddfellow's Eye of God as part of the sculpture. Heart and Hand is body and soul. It's beautiful, the graphic is gorgeous, and it's sweet nature, body and soul, heart and hand. Who wouldn't like that? Only a cad. The other symbols, oh, the three links, but it isn't as much the sentiment behind it. It's just the way it looks. I just connect to it in a really visceral way. Part of their initiation rites involved a device called a hoodwink, a pair of goggles that went over the eye, and they had blinders, and the initiate was brought into a room. One would lift the lever and expose what was happening there, which was something terrifying, and I guess that scared the bejesus out of you. Optical devices, particularly testing spectacles. They're made out of celluloid, but they look like ivory, gauges on them that have numbers and black ink, and they look like precision, which I'm drawn to, back to the scientific instruments. In a lot of my sculptures, there was a single reflective element, a globe, as a central element of the sculpture. I sort of thought of it as command central. All of my sculptures exist on turntables so that you can turn the sculpture itself so that you have a total view of it, a 360-degree view of it. My friend Bobby Vanderway came to my studio and photographed the sculpture. Bobby shot it and turned it around, and the reflected figure in the center of it remained constant while this entire sculpture spun around it. Oh, wow. I had no idea that actually happened. But once that appeared to me, I tried to incorporate that in a conscious way. I think I'm drawn to ancient Egypt more than I am to any place else, period. I encountered the Amarna Heads in the Metropolitan Museum many years ago. And part of the installation was the studio of a sculptor, Tutmo's sculptor. They found several of these heads. This was happening in Amarna. He was the sculptor to Akhenaten, the pharaoh, and Nefertiti, his queen. And these were apparently sculptures of their daughters, the princesses, and they're beguiling. They're unusual looking, and they strike a chord, and it's of course mysterious why the chord is so deep. It's an abstraction of what a human being looks like. The backs of the heads are swollen and distended. And I don't know whether it's because of that or in spite of that, they encompass this great mesmerizing beauty. You don't want to take your eyes off them. Photographing stuff to me means I can spend time in a relatively objective way looking at a single object. I'm so elaborately involved in what I'm doing that I think that robs me of a certain critical ability. Putting it in front of a camera and looking at an image of what it is that I'm doing just allows me to step back and gives me an opportunity to correct in a way that it's not available to me with my own eyes. It in itself is an entire process. Well, the drawings actually started off, they were plans. I made sculptures by laminating boards. I used 10-quarter poplar and I glued the boards together. Each single drawing represented one of the laminates of the sculpture. That was my working process. It gave me an opportunity to have a lot of hints along the way. I like ritual. As a way of saying goodbye, before I started the next sculpture, I would do a whole series of photographs of the sculpture and a drawing. Somewhere along the way, I started making drawings that were independent of the sculptures. For a couple of years, I did nothing but drawings. I discovered mylar. I discovered materials and tools that allowed me to do stuff through my mind that my hands, with their limitations, had the wherewithal to do. One of the wonderful things about making art is that this late date, I have an opportunity to have a real feeling that I've just made a breakthrough. About a year ago, I was offered a show in a gallery in New York City. And this gave me an opportunity to think about where I am and what I'm doing and what I have done. Looking back over my history in the past 30 some odd years as an art maker, I find myself in a place where, wow, that's really exciting. I'm off on another path within the same basic framework, but I've discovered a whole new place to go.